Brooklyn, New York, a city built on power, money, and silence. In the shadows of its towering buildings, where deals are made in whispers and loyalty is measured in blood, a young man named Vincent Moretti walked alone through the rain-soaked streets. He wasn't anyone special, not yet. Just another face in the crowd, trying to survive in a city that devours the weak. But what Vincent didn't know that night was that his life was about to change forever. Vincent lived a quiet life, if you could even call it that. His small apartment was barely enough to keep him sheltered, and the silence inside it often felt heavier than the chaos outside. Every night, he sat alone, lost in his thoughts, questioning his future. He wasn't afraid of hard work, but deep down, he knew that working a regular job would never get him out of the life he was trapped in. He wanted more money, more power, more control over his destiny. And in Brooklyn, there was only one way to get that. It started with a simple observation. Vincent noticed the men who didn't struggle. The ones who wore expensive suits, drove black cars, and spoke with quiet authority. They didn't rush. They didn't panic. People respected them, feared them. And as Vincent watched from a distance, curiosity slowly turned into fascination. He began to follow their movements, not closely enough to be noticed, but enough to understand their rhythm. These men weren't ordinary. They belonged to something bigger, something powerful. Opportunity came unexpectedly. One night, a local associate approached Vincent with a simple job: deliver a package, no questions asked. It sounded easy, almost too easy. Vincent hesitated for a moment, knowing that in Brooklyn, nothing was ever truly simple. But he also understood that chances like this didn't come often. So he accepted. That single decision, made in a quiet moment of desperation and ambition, pulled him one step closer into a world he could never walk away from. As Vincent walked through the dark streets, the weight of the envelope in his hand felt heavier than it should have. Every passing car made him alert. Every shadow made him cautious. He realized that this wasn't just a delivery, it was a test. A test of his nerves, his loyalty, and his ability to stay silent under pressure. His heartbeat echoed in his ears, but he didn't stop. Because deep down, Vincent knew, if he wanted to rise, he had to prove himself. Inside a dimly lit club filled with smoke and quiet conversations, Vincent handed over the package. The man receiving it didn't smile, didn't thank him, he simply nodded. But that nod carried weight. It was acknowledgement. Recognition. And in that moment, Vincent felt something shift inside him. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. He had stepped into their world, even if just for a second. As Vincent stepped out into the cold night air, he paused for a brief moment and looked back at the club. Something about that place, about those men, pulled at him. He knew he had crossed a line, one that most people would fear. But instead of fear, he felt excitement. A dangerous kind of excitement. Because for the first time in his life, he felt like he was moving toward something bigger. Edited 11:43 a.m. The next morning, Brooklyn didn't feel the same to Vincent anymore. The streets were still crowded, the noise still constant, and the city still moved at its usual pace, but something inside him had shifted. As he walked through the foggy streets, he kept replaying the previous night in his mind. That delivery, that silent nod, that moment inside the club, it wasn't just a task. It was an invitation. And Vincent understood one thing clearly: once you step into that world, there is no turning back. Sitting alone in a quiet diner, Vincent stared into his coffee, his thoughts racing faster than ever before. He tried to act normal, but nothing about him felt normal anymore. Questions filled his mind. Who were those men really, and what kind of world had he just stepped into? But beyond the questions, there was something stronger growing inside him. A desire. A pull toward something bigger. Because for the first time in his life, he saw a path that didn't lead to struggle, but to power. As he sat there, lost in thought, a familiar presence approached his table. The same well-dressed man from the night before. Calm, composed, and carrying an authority that didn't need to be spoken out loud. Vincent looked up, meeting his gaze. The man sat down without asking and simply said, "You did well." Just 3 words, but they carried meaning far beyond their simplicity. It wasn't praise, it was recognition. The man leaned slightly closer, his voice low and controlled as he explained that the job Vincent had completed wasn't random. It was a test. A simple one, but enough to measure his discipline, his silence, and his ability to stay calm under pressure. Vincent listened carefully, choosing his words wisely, or rather, choosing not to say much at all. He understood that in this world, speaking less was often more powerful than speaking at all. Without making it feel like an offer, the man placed another envelope on the table between them. No explanation. No instructions. Just expectation. Vincent looked at it for a moment, fully aware of what it meant. This wasn't just another job, it was a step deeper into the unknown. He could walk away right then, pretend none of this ever happened. But he didn't. Because somewhere inside him, the decision had already been made. Later that day, Vincent walked through the city once again, the envelope in his hand feeling both familiar and heavier at the same time. The fear from before hadn't disappeared, but it had changed. It was no longer overwhelming, it was controlled. Focused. Vincent wasn't just reacting anymore. He was learning, adapting, understanding the rhythm of this world. Every step he took now felt more deliberate, more calculated. He began watching more closely. The way these men carried themselves, the way they spoke, the way others reacted to them. Respect wasn't forced, it came naturally. And fear followed right behind it. Vincent realized that power in this world wasn't loud or chaotic. It was quiet, controlled, and precise. And slowly, without even realizing it, he began shaping himself into that image. That night, Vincent completed the second delivery. The location was darker, more isolated, and far more tense than the first. Every movement felt heavier, every second stretched longer. But this time, Vincent didn't hesitate. He didn't second-guess himself. He moved with quiet confidence, following through with the task exactly as expected. And when it was done, he felt it again, that shift. That quiet acknowledgement that he was moving forward. As he walked away, something about him had changed. His posture was different. His pace was steadier. The uncertainty that once followed him had begun to fade. In its place was something new, confidence. Not arrogance, not recklessness, but a controlled sense of direction. Vincent was no longer just testing the waters. He was stepping deeper into them. Standing under a dim streetlight, Vincent paused one last time, letting the moment settle in. He thought about the path ahead, the risks, the unknown future waiting for him. But instead of fear, he felt clarity. This was just the beginning. The tests would become harder, the stakes much higher. But Vincent Moretti was ready. Because in a city like Brooklyn, power doesn't come to those who hesitate. It belongs to those who move forward, no matter the cost. By the third night, something about Vincent had completely changed. The nervous energy that once followed him was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence that even he didn't fully understand yet. As he walked through the neon-lit streets of Brooklyn, he no longer felt like an outsider looking in. He felt like someone who was beginning to belong. Not fully accepted, not yet. But closer than ever before. When Vincent stepped into the club again, the atmosphere felt different. The same smoke-filled air, the same low conversations, the same men in suits, but this time, a few eyes turned toward him. Not with suspicion, but with recognition. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable to anyone else, but Vincent saw it. And in that world, even the smallest acknowledgement meant everything. This time, it wasn't just a street-level associate who approached him. A higher-ranking member stepped forward, his presence commanding without effort. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. Men like him were known without names. He studied Vincent for a moment, as if measuring him, then gave a slight nod. That nod carried more weight than any words could. It meant Vincent had passed another unseen test. Vincent was invited to sit. Not as an equal, but no longer as an outsider either. The conversation was quiet, controlled, and filled with meaning beneath every word. They didn't ask him much, but they watched him closely. Every reaction, every expression, every pause was being evaluated. Vincent understood the pressure, but he didn't let it show. He remained calm, composed, and most importantly, silent when necessary. Inside, his mind was sharp and alert. He analyzed every detail, the tone of their voices, the way they looked at each other, the unspoken hierarchy that existed in the room. Vincent realized that this world wasn't built on chaos, but on structure. There were levels, rules, and boundaries that were never explained, only understood. And he was beginning to understand them. After a few moments, one of the men placed a small package in front of him. This time, there were brief instructions, more detailed than before, more specific, and far more serious. This wasn't just a delivery anymore. It was responsibility. Vincent could feel the difference immediately. The stakes were higher, and the margin for error was gone. But instead of hesitation, he felt ready. The location he was sent to was deeper into the city, far from the safer streets he was used to. The shadows felt heavier, the silence more dangerous. Every step carried risk, every movement demanded awareness. But Vincent didn't slow down. He had learned to control his fear, to channel it into focus. This was no longer just about proving himself. It was about surviving and advancing at the same time. When he finally reached the destination, the exchange was quick and precise. No unnecessary words, no wasted time. The man receiving the package barely looked at him, but Vincent understood that was a good sign. It meant everything had gone exactly as expected. No complications. No mistakes. And in this world, perfection wasn't praised, it was required. As Vincent walked away, he felt it again, that shift inside him. But this time, it was stronger. More defined. He wasn't just following instructions anymore. He was becoming part of a system, a structure that rewarded precision and punished weakness. His movements were sharper, his thoughts clearer. And for the first time, he began to see a future where he wasn't just surviving, but rising. Standing alone in the shadows, Vincent allowed himself a brief moment to reflect. He had taken another step forward, deeper into a world that most people feared. But he didn't feel fear anymore, not in the same way. What he felt now was purpose. Because Vincent Moretti was no longer just testing the limits. He was beginning to understand them. And once you understand the rules of power, you can start to bend them. By now, Vincent was no longer walking through Brooklyn as just another face in the crowd. The streets felt familiar, almost like they were beginning to recognize him. The light rain reflected off the pavement as he moved with calm precision, his steps measured and controlled. The uncertainty that once followed him had faded, replaced by something far more dangerous: confidence. Not reckless confidence, but the kind that comes from understanding the game just enough to play it, but not yet enough to win it. When he entered the club that night, the change was undeniable. Conversations didn't stop, but they shifted slightly. A few men glanced at him, not with suspicion, but with quiet acknowledgement. It was subtle, almost invisible, but Vincent noticed it immediately. Respect in this world wasn't given openly, it was shown in the smallest ways. And Vincent was beginning to earn it. This time, Vincent wasn't standing in the background or waiting to be called. He was brought closer, seated near men who carried real influence. The air around them felt heavier, filled with unspoken authority. Conversations were quieter, more controlled, and every word carried weight. Vincent understood that being here wasn't a reward, it was another test. A more dangerous one. As the conversation unfolded, Vincent said very little. He listened carefully, absorbing every detail. The way they spoke, the topics they discussed, the subtle tensions hidden beneath calm voices, it all revealed something important. This wasn't just a group of criminals. This was an organized system, built on hierarchy, discipline, and control. And within that system, every man had a place and a limit. At one point, Vincent noticed a subtle shift in the room. Two men exchanged words, not loudly, not aggressively, but with enough tension to be felt. It was brief, controlled, and quickly buried under silence. But Vincent didn't miss it. That small moment revealed something critical: loyalty in this world wasn't absolute. Even inside the circle, there were cracks. Small, almost invisible cracks, but dangerous ones. Soon after, Vincent was given another task. This time, the tone was different. There was no casual delivery, no vague expectation. The instructions were clear, precise, and carried an unspoken warning: failure was not an option. Vincent accepted without hesitation, but he understood the message. Each step forward came with greater responsibility and greater risk. The streets he walked that night were darker, quieter, and far more dangerous than before. The city seemed to close in around him, every shadow hiding uncertainty. But Vincent didn't slow down. He had learned to move with purpose, to control his fear instead of letting it control him. Every step was calculated, every movement deliberate. He wasn't just completing tasks anymore, he was proving that he could handle pressure. The exchange itself was tense, more intense than anything he had experienced before. The man on the other side didn't speak much, but his presence alone was enough to create pressure. Vincent handled it flawlessly. No hesitation, no mistakes, no unnecessary words. Everything was done exactly as expected. And in that moment, Vincent understood something important: perfection wasn't impressive in this world. It was required. As he walked away, Vincent felt the difference again. His posture was stronger, his presence more defined. The fear that once followed him had been replaced with control. He was no longer reacting to the world around him, he was adapting to it, shaping himself into something more. Something sharper. Something dangerous. Standing alone in the shadows, Vincent paused for a moment, letting everything settle in. He had taken another step forward, deeper into a world built on power and hidden tensions. But now he saw it clearly: this wasn't just about loyalty or obedience. It was about understanding the system, recognizing its weaknesses, and knowing exactly when to move. Because Vincent Moretti was no longer just part of the game, he was starting to see how it could be played. By this point, the city no longer felt like something Vincent had to conquer, it felt like something he was beginning to understand. The glowing skyline of New York stretched endlessly into the night, each light representing power, money, and control. And somewhere within that vast system, Vincent was slowly carving out his place. Not loudly, not recklessly, but with precision. Because in this world, the quiet ones often became the most dangerous. When Vincent walked into the club now, the difference was impossible to ignore. The subtle nods, the brief glances of recognition, these were no longer rare moments. They were becoming normal. He didn't need to prove that he belonged anymore. He had already done that. Now, the question wasn't whether he could survive in this world, it was how far he could go. He was no longer kept at the edge of conversations. This time, he sat closer to the center, surrounded by men who didn't just follow orders, they gave them. Their presence carried authority, and their words shaped outcomes. Vincent understood exactly where he was sitting, and more importantly, what it meant. He wasn't just being tested anymore. He was being positioned. The conversation that night was different. It wasn't about small tasks or routine work. It was about something bigger, an operation that required coordination, trust, and absolute precision. Documents were placed on the table, names were mentioned carefully, and decisions were made without hesitation. Vincent didn't speak, but he listened closely, understanding that every detail mattered. Then it happened. For the first time, Vincent wasn't just given instructions, he was given responsibility over others. The shift was subtle, but significant. A few men looked at him differently now, not as an equal, but as someone they might have to follow. Vincent didn't react outwardly, but inside, he understood exactly what this meant. Power wasn't being offered to him, it was being tested in his hands. As Vincent stepped outside with the small crew assigned to him, he took a moment to observe them. Each man had experience, each one carried their own reputation. Leading them wouldn't be easy. But Vincent didn't try to dominate the situation. Instead, he spoke calmly, clearly, giving instructions without raising his voice. Authority in this world wasn't about volume, it was about control. And Vincent had learned that well. The operation itself required precision. Every movement had to align, every second mattered. There was no room for confusion or hesitation. Vincent stayed focused, watching everything unfold while making small adjustments when necessary. He didn't rush, he didn't panic. He adapted. And that ability to stay calm under pressure was what separated him from the rest. When it was over, the result was clear. Everything had gone exactly as planned. No mistakes, no unexpected problems. The men who had been watching Vincent now looked at him differently. There was respect there, real respect. Not given because of orders, but earned through action. Vincent didn't acknowledge it openly, but he felt it. And in this world, that kind of respect was more valuable than anything else. Later that night, as Vincent walked alone through the city, his thoughts were sharper than ever. He wasn't just thinking about what had happened, he was thinking about what it meant. He had crossed another line, stepped into a role that carried real influence. But with that influence came risk. Because the higher you rise in a world like this, the more visible you become. Standing in the shadows once again, Vincent allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He had proven that he could lead, that he could handle pressure, that he could execute without failure. But now, a new question began to form in his mind. In a world where power was everything, and loyalty was never guaranteed, how far could he trust the very system that was raising him? Because Vincent Moretti was no longer just climbing the ranks, he was beginning to see the cracks beneath them. By now, the streets felt colder than before, even though nothing had really changed on the surface. Vincent walked alone through a dark alley, his footsteps echoing softly against the walls, but inside, something was shifting. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't doubt. It was awareness. The deeper he went into this world, the more clearly he could see it for what it truly was, a system built not just on loyalty, but on control, manipulation, and silent power struggles. When Vincent entered the club that night, the atmosphere felt heavier than usual. The same men were there, the same setting, but something beneath the surface had changed. Conversations were shorter, quieter. Faces were more serious. It was the kind of tension you couldn't explain, but you could feel. And Vincent noticed it immediately. Because now, he wasn't just observing, he was understanding. The inner circle was already deep in conversation when Vincent arrived. Their voices were low, controlled, but their expressions revealed more than their words. Vincent stayed close enough to listen, but far enough to remain unnoticed. He had learned that the most valuable information in this world was never given directly, it had to be observed, piece by piece, moment by moment. At one point, Vincent caught something important. Two high-ranking members exchanged a look, not friendly, not respectful, but cold. It lasted only a second, but it said everything. There was tension between them, something deeper than disagreement. Something personal. Vincent didn't react, but he memorized it. Because in a world like this, small tensions could turn into dangerous conflicts without warning. As Vincent sat quietly, his mind worked faster than ever. He began connecting patterns, recalling past conversations, remembering subtle details that others might have ignored. And slowly, a realization started to form. This organization wasn't as united as it appeared. Beneath the structure, beneath the discipline, there were fractures. And those fractures were growing. Soon after, Vincent was given another assignment. The instructions were direct, but the tone carried something new, a warning. It wasn't spoken out loud, but it was there. The kind of warning that told him this task mattered more than usual. Vincent accepted without hesitation, but he understood the difference. This wasn't just another step forward. This was a test with consequences. The location he was sent to was more dangerous than anything before. An isolated industrial area, covered in darkness and silence. The kind of place where mistakes didn't just cost you respect, they cost you everything. Vincent moved carefully, every sense alert, every instinct sharpened. But even in that tension, he remained calm. Because he had learned that panic was the fastest way to fail. The task itself went as planned, but something felt off. It was small, almost unnoticeable, a delay, a look, a detail that didn't quite fit. Most people would have ignored it. But Vincent didn't. He paid attention. Because in this world, the smallest inconsistency could mean the biggest danger. And for the first time, he began to question not just the mission, but the people behind it. As Vincent walked away, his thoughts were heavier than before. He wasn't just thinking about what had happened, he was analyzing it. Breaking it down, piece by piece, trying to understand what it meant. The deeper he looked, the more one idea began to form in his mind. Something wasn't right. And if something wasn't right inside the system, then no one inside it was truly safe. Standing alone in the shadows, Vincent no longer felt like someone climbing the ranks. He felt like someone standing inside a structure that was slowly beginning to crack. The trust he once relied on was no longer absolute. And in its place, something new was growing, doubt. Because Vincent Moretti had finally realized the truth. In a world built on loyalty, betrayal isn't a possibility, it's an inevitability. Vincent had changed. The streets no longer intimidated him, and the shadows no longer held the same fear. But something deeper was stirring inside him, a sense of awareness that went beyond simple caution. The world he had stepped into was no longer just a place to survive. It was a place where every move mattered, every glance could betray a secret, and every silence spoke volumes. And Vincent had begun to listen to it all. When he entered the club that night, he noticed the subtle shifts immediately. Conversations paused for a split second, glances were exchanged, and a quiet tension filled the room. Vincent understood that something beneath the surface had changed. The hierarchy, the loyalty, the hidden rules, they weren't as stable as they seemed. And for the first time, he realized he was part of something far more volatile than he had imagined. The inner circle was engaged in a serious discussion, their voices low but purposeful. Vincent stayed close enough to absorb every word, every inflection, every pause. He understood that in this world, the most important conversations happened in silence, in subtle gestures, and in the unspoken meanings behind every statement. Each detail was a clue, a piece of a larger puzzle that Vincent was beginning to understand. Then Vincent noticed it, a fleeting glance between two powerful members, cold, calculated, and loaded with unspoken tension. It was brief, almost invisible, but Vincent saw it clearly. Rivalries like these weren't just personal, they could change the course of the organization. He realized that loyalty wasn't guaranteed, and alliances were fragile. The cracks within the circle were widening. Sitting quietly, Vincent's mind worked faster than ever. Every gesture, every word, every moment of hesitation was catalogued and analyzed. He began connecting patterns he hadn't noticed before, understanding the subtle power plays that governed the room. And slowly, a realization emerged: he could use this knowledge. He could maneuver within the cracks to his advantage, if he was careful, precise, and patient. Soon, Vincent was handed a high-stakes task. The instructions were brief but loaded with implicit expectation. Failure was not an option, and that reality weighed on him more than ever. Yet instead of fear, he felt focus. This wasn't just another job, it was a test of his understanding, his judgment, and his ability to navigate the fragile loyalties of those around him. The assignment took him deep into the city, to areas where the slightest misstep could have consequences. Every shadow, every sound, every passing movement demanded his attention. Vincent moved cautiously, his mind calculating, his senses sharp. He had learned that survival in this world was not about strength alone, but about awareness, precision, and control. When the task was completed, it was done with silent precision. Those receiving him acknowledged nothing openly, yet Vincent could sense the respect in the way they observed him. It was quiet, understated, and far more meaningful than praise. In this world, actions spoke louder than words, and Vincent had made his presence known once again. As Vincent walked away, his thoughts were sharper, his presence stronger. He wasn't just executing tasks anymore, he was shaping his identity within this world. Each success, each careful move, brought him closer to power, and with that growing influence came awareness of the fragility around him. Because the higher you rise, the more you can see the cracks beneath the surface, and the more dangerous they become.
Standing alone under the dim glow of the city lights, Vincent reflected on the events of the night. The lessons were clear: loyalty is fragile, power is volatile, and understanding the subtle undercurrents is more important than brute force. He had grown, learned, and adapted, but he also knew that the real challenges were yet to come. Vincent Moretti wasn't just a participant anymore. He was beginning to play the game on his own terms.
By now, Vincent's perspective had changed completely. The city stretched before him like a living map of opportunity and danger. Every rooftop, every alley, every dimly lit street held a lesson, a chance, or a trap. Vincent had begun to see the patterns, the ways people moved, the hidden loyalties, the subtle power plays. He wasn't just walking through Brooklyn anymore. He was studying it, calculating it, and beginning to control his place within it. When he entered the club that night, the subtle acknowledgement he had earned before was now more pronounced. Eyes followed him, not with suspicion, but with careful measurement. Vincent understood that his presence now carried weight. Every move he made, every word he spoke, was being noted. He was no longer an observer. He was a participant with influence, slowly becoming someone the organization couldn't ignore. Seated among the higher-ranking members, Vincent felt the difference in how they treated him. The atmosphere was still tense, but there was recognition now, a quiet deference that hadn't been there before. He didn't flaunt it, he didn't need to. Authority in this world was about presence, about the subtle acknowledgement that you understood the rules and could navigate them. Vincent was beginning to embody that presence. The conversation shifted to the larger operation, involving multiple men, complex planning, and high stakes. Vincent followed every detail closely, absorbing names, locations, and strategies. He understood that the success of this plan depended not on luck, but on precision, trust, and the ability to anticipate every move. And for the first time, he felt like he was capable of thinking like the men around him, not just following them. Then came the pivotal moment. Vincent was given control over a crucial part of the operation. The men around him didn't openly acknowledge it, but he could feel their scrutiny, their unspoken judgment. This was no longer a test of obedience, it was a test of capability. Vincent accepted the responsibility with calm assurance, knowing that how he performed now would define his path forward in the organization. Outside, Vincent gathered the men under his temporary command. He spoke quietly, clearly, and deliberately. Each instruction was measured, each movement purposeful. Leadership in this world wasn't about volume, it was about control, composure, and earning respect through action. Vincent's crew followed without question, recognizing the confidence and clarity in his guidance. The operation unfolded like a well-choreographed performance. Every step had to align perfectly, every second counted. Vincent moved with focus, adjusting when necessary, but never losing composure. The tension in the environment was thick, but he thrived in it. This was more than survival, it was command, and Vincent had proven he could handle it. When the operation concluded successfully, Vincent observed the reactions carefully. There were no celebrations, no loud praise, just quiet acknowledgement. But that was enough. In this world, respect was never openly given. It was earned through precision, reliability, and composure under pressure. And Vincent had earned it again. Walking away, Vincent felt the subtle but unmistakable change within himself. He was no longer just performing tasks, he was building influence, learning the dynamics of power, and shaping his reputation. Each calculated move strengthened his position, each observation sharpened his understanding of the fragile structure around him. Alone under a dim streetlight, Vincent allowed himself a brief reflection. He had grown, learned, and commanded respect. But he knew that influence came with responsibility and danger. The cracks in the system were more visible than ever, and the higher he rose, the more he could see the fault lines. Vincent Moretti wasn't just a player anymore, he was beginning to shape the game itself. Vincent had grown sharper. The city streets no longer surprised him. He anticipated every shadow, every step, every whisper. But with knowledge came clarity. He now understood the cracks hidden beneath loyalty, the subtle betrayals masked by smiles. Power wasn't just about influence. It was about knowing when to trust, when to act, and when to wait. And Vincent had begun to see the threads connecting every decision, every hidden agenda. When he entered the club, the air felt heavier than ever. Subtle glances and half-smiles hinted at underlying tensions. Conversation seemed rehearsed, polite, but Vincent knew better. He could feel the unspoken strategies forming in the room, and he realized that even those closest to him were players in a game he had only just begun to master. Every nod, every gesture, every silence carried meaning, and he listened to all of it. Sitting closer to the inner circle, Vincent observed quietly. He didn't speak much, but his eyes absorbed everything, the shifts in posture, the fleeting glances, the small reactions that betrayed intent. In this world, it wasn't words that held power. It was observation, understanding, and patience. Vincent had learned to sit in silence while the room revealed its secrets. Then Vincent noticed it, a brief look exchanged between two powerful men. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but the meaning was clear. Rivalry was growing. Alliances in this organization were fragile, and loyalty was conditional. Vincent recognized the danger immediately. Knowledge of these fractures wasn't enough. Timing, strategy, and careful influence would be required to navigate them. Sitting alone later, Vincent's mind worked faster than ever. He replayed every interaction, connected every detail, and began plotting his own strategy. The path forward was delicate. Every action had consequences. Every word could shift loyalties. And he knew one thing clearly: to rise, he would need to manipulate the cracks in the system without revealing his hand too soon. Soon, Vincent was handed a secretive assignment. The envelope contained more than instructions. It carried responsibility, danger, and trust intertwined. He read the details carefully, aware that failure was no longer an option. Each step he took from here on out would be calculated, precise, and deliberate. This was the moment when influence would start to become power, and power, when handled carefully, could become control. The streets that night were darker, more treacherous than before. Every shadow could conceal a threat, every unexpected sound demanded vigilance. Vincent moved with careful precision, aware that mistakes now had higher stakes. But he didn't falter. Every step was measured, every decision deliberate. He wasn't just completing a task anymore, he was maneuvering through a game with rules that only he fully understood. The assignment was executed with flawless precision. Those observing did not openly commend him, yet Vincent could feel the silent acknowledgement in their demeanor. In this world, respect wasn't loud, it was quiet, earned through competence, composure, and calculated execution. Vincent had proven himself once again, but he knew the real challenges were still ahead. As he walked away, Vincent's thoughts were sharper than ever. He was no longer a passive participant. He was calculating, analyzing, and subtly positioning himself for influence. Each victory increased his awareness of the fragility of the hierarchy around him, and he realized that the higher he rose, the more visible the cracks became. And where there were cracks, there was opportunity. Edited 6:11 p.m. Close. You can undo and redo changes with Ctrl+Z and Ctrl+Y. Alone under the dim glow of the streetlights, Vincent allowed himself a moment of reflection. Loyalty was fragile. Power was fleeting. The system had weaknesses, and he had begun to map them. Vincent Moretti wasn't just climbing the ranks anymore, he was studying the fractures, preparing to manipulate them, and planning to emerge not just as a player, but as a force to be reckoned with. By the 10th night, Vincent Moretti wasn't just a rising figure, he was a presence that couldn't be ignored. The city stretched endlessly before him, lights flickering like secrets waiting to be uncovered. Every shadow, every alley, every whisper had taught him a lesson. And now, he was ready. Ready not just to follow the rules of this dangerous game, but to bend them to his own advantage. When he entered the club, the acknowledgement he received was undeniable. Eyes followed him with measured respect and veiled suspicion. Vincent understood the unspoken message. He had arrived at a point where influence and fear intertwined. Every man in the room was aware of his growing power, yet none could predict the full extent of his ambition. He moved with quiet confidence, knowing the game had changed. Seated among the inner circle, Vincent noticed subtle shifts in posture, tiny hesitations, and fleeting glances exchanged between the most powerful men. The dynamics had changed. Where loyalty once seemed steady, cracks now showed. Vincent realized that understanding these fractures was more valuable than any title or role. Power was no longer about obedience, it was about perception, strategy, and control. Then he saw it, the unspoken conflict between two of the most influential men. Their eyes met with silent aggression, a fleeting clash that could ignite chaos. Vincent didn't react outwardly, but internally, he understood the stakes. Rivalries like this weren't just personal, they were dangerous, unpredictable, and could be exploited. Knowledge of the fissures in power was now a weapon. Vincent retreated mentally, analyzing every detail. Every interaction, every subtle gesture, every pause had revealed a thread he could follow. He began planning, weaving his own strategy, preparing to manipulate these hidden tensions. His mind was sharper, his focus clearer, and his ambition had crystallized. The path forward was risky, but the rewards were immense. Soon, a high-stakes assignment landed in his hands. The envelope contained precise instructions, but also carried unspoken pressure. This task wasn't just about loyalty, it was about influence. Vincent accepted calmly, knowing that how he executed it would determine his standing, not just among the men he led, but in the eyes of the inner circle itself. The assignment took him deep into the city's shadows, where danger lurked in every corner. Every step was calculated, every sound demanded vigilance. Vincent's mind was in full control, analyzing threats, predicting movements, and adjusting in real time. This was no longer a test of skill, it was a demonstration of mastery. And Vincent intended to prove he was more than capable. The task was executed flawlessly. The men who observed him gave nothing openly, yet Vincent could sense their recognition. Respect in this world wasn't verbal, it was measured, subtle, earned through consistency and precision. Vincent had not just succeeded, he had positioned himself as someone whose presence could no longer be ignored. As he walked alone under the city lights, Vincent reflected on the journey. He had learned the structure, the weaknesses, and the unspoken rules of power. Each calculated step had brought him closer to influence, and now, the lines between loyalty and betrayal were clear. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was shaping the hierarchy itself. Standing alone in the shadows, Vincent allowed himself a final moment of reflection. The game was no longer about obedience. It was about strategy, patience, and timing. Betrayal was inevitable in this world, but Vincent Moretti was no longer just a participant. He had become the one who could bend loyalty, manipulate influence, and emerge not only unscathed but victorious. The stage was set, and the final moves were his to make.